Well, we're back on the same day, talking with Harold Thurman. Uh, September, no, this is August 18th. Where's the 15th? Heck, it's 15th. I'll get it right in a minute. Saturday, August 15th, 2009. And we've been talking about Harold's childhood, Harold Cloyd Thurman. We've got up to 1938, 37, when his dad bought a tractor. They were living on the Nichols place. Isn't that about where we were discussing?
I guess he only worked that place 2 or 3 years. Dad decided that he'd never be able to make a good living with only 70 acres. And, he needed some grazing land and some more farming land, so he rented a farm, 160 acres, down a mile and a half south. And he thought with the 2 farms he could quit his job in town and make a living on the farm. But Mr. Nichols was not happy with that. He said that since he was supposed to get rent of thirds and fourths, that he wanted Dad to spend all of his time on his little 70 acres there and make him as much money as he could for renting it.
Yeah.
But Dad thought with a tractor he could easily farm both places. Anyway, he had to give up the Nichols farm, and that's when we moved down on the highway. And
But you were still in the New Liberty district.
yes. It was a small 3-room house on the farm. And first thing he did was to add a long addition on the west side. And there was only 1 bedroom, so that added an extra bedroom, and it was quite a way separated then from that bedroom Mother and Dad slept in. But about 2/3 of what he added on to the west side of the house there, a shed room, became back porch. So the bedroom was enclosed. The back porch he built with a screen around 2 sides of it that were probably 3 foot open.
Yeah.
And so in the summertime he would open up the awnings that he put on there. He built awnings out of ducking, and that would be open in the summertime so that the air would blow through.
What is ducking?
That's what you made cotton sacks out of.
Mm-hmm.
Blue jeans are made of ducking.
Okay.
And of course we wore striped overalls most of the time. And it was a high-priced ducking too.
Yeah.
But they used ducking to build tents, to make tents out of. It was pretty heavy stuff. A cotton sack would last a long time, dragging it on the ground with 100 pounds of cotton in it.
Right.
But we had the cream separator on the back porch, and at the south end of it there was a double bed where Morris and I slept in summertime. And sometimes until it got pretty cold in the winter. Time or two I woke up with snow on the
On
bed.
the bed.
So we moved.
Well, you were telling about having to get a bucket of water and bathe on the back step.
Yeah, yeah. The farmall, I don't know what Dad paid for it, but it not only had iron wheels, but it didn't have hydraulic lift to raise the plows. So for a little guy like me and even Mother, the levers on both sides stuck up pretty high beside the seat that you sat on. But in order to lift the plows out of the ground, like I was cultivating, you had plows on each side, and it would take 2 rows at a time. But when I needed to lift the plows out of the ground, to turn around at the end of the row, I'd have to stop the tractor and get out of the seat and stand with my feet on the axle to use both hands to pull the plow out of the ground. So what I did, I would make a wide turn at the end, skip 2 rows, and take the other 2 rows going back, and leave the plows in the ground all the way. That worked pretty good, except sometimes you'd hit a rock or something, and then the plow would get turned crooked, and I'd have to stop and get off and adjust it, put it back where it's supposed to be. And
you're turning
the tractor, everything with the cultivator still plowing.
Yeah.
So that didn't leave any feed going down to the fence.
Yeah.
I try to get down as close to the fence as possible, but when I turned, that
back in.
The plows on the back would whip around, and once in a while they'd catch into the barbed wire fence. And then I'd tear down the fence. We'd have fence to repair. So for a little guy, you had to be careful to do it right. And, anyway, I did most of his plowing and cultivating and everything. We used section harrow early in the year when the stuff was just coming up to cover up some of the weeds and keep the ground from blowing away when we had a dust storm after a rain. You harrow it first, and then it doesn't blow in the wind so bad, blow sand out of it. Sand would just cut the little cotton down, off of the stem.
Well, you were telling about one time you had a bad storm you thought was may have been a tornado, and the shotgun story, the shotgun that I have now that.
Well, that's when we lived over there by Grandpa and Guy.
Okay.
Dad was doing pretty good financially until we sold out and left it all. We made pretty good crops, and he had built up a pretty good bunch of cattle and hogs and chickens. He thought that we could live on cream and eggs, which we did for several years. That was our cash crop.
Right.
Every week we'd take the cream to town and sell it at the creamery, which was a little storefront on Main Street.
Yeah.
I think it was about 10 foot wide and 30 foot deep.
I went with Grandma one time down to, well, I've
And
got the cream can.
They would buy the eggs, and we get these big egg crates that, I don't know, seems like they held 2 dozen on each level, and then we had, it was double wide, so seemed like it would hold about 12 dozen eggs.
Yeah.
And we'd take them to town and sell them. Anyway, Dad built this hen house out there, and in the spring of the year, he'd buy a couple hundred baby chicks, white leghorn chickens. And when they started crowing, we knew that that weren't going to lay any eggs, so we'd kill the roosters and eat them. We'd have one or two nearly every day. And after I got big enough, it was my job to catch a rooster for dinner.
They were still small.
They're about half grown.
Yeah.
One little fryer would make enough for one meal for four people,
Right.
2 kids and 2 adults. Well,
Well, you were saying that you could live off the milk and eggs. Now that's kind of what the guy had. Well, did he follow your dad's example, or was he already doing that? Building
I don't
up
know
the
when that guy really got into
the dairy business.
The dairy business. I think it was after, most of it was after I went off to college. But of
But
course,
you were already milking a bunch.
all the farmers had milk cows
Okay.
for their own food,
Yeah.
you know. And we didn't milk very many back in those days, but we were growing some more.
Yeah.
And the steers, you know, when they got fat, we'd have one to kill and eat. And I remember one time Dad butchered a steer, and he put about half of it in the trunk of the car. There's a lid that raised up on the back,
Yeah.
and he put about half of this steer in the back end of the car, and he drove around to the neighbors and said, "Let me sell you some fresh beef."
Meat. Yeah.
And he sold out, I guess. I don't know what it was bringing, but he made a little money, I guess. But he thought that egg business was a good business, and he built this hen house. And when the chickens got big enough to lay eggs, so then we had plenty to eat, and if they weren't too small, pullet eggs, they wouldn't bring very much. You didn't sell them. Eat the pullet eggs, keep the big ones to sell. But
how many years would a good layer?
I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I guess.
Yeah.
But we had, I think, around 300 white leghorn hens in that chicken house when the tornado hit. It was in the night sometime. I never did wake up.
Yeah.
I was in this bedroom on the southeast corner of the house. Mother and Dad had a bed in the living room, but I know I was sleeping in there in a double bed with my head at the south end of the room, and the bed was right, you know, a little metal frame bed that was right against the south wall. Well, the house was made out of 1x12 boxing boards that were vertical, no frame, with a little lath over the crack between the 2 boards. And when the storm hit that, one of the 2x4s hit right over where my head was, and it cracked the 1x12, you know, about maybe 2 foot or maybe 18 inches, just cracked it, and didn't come all the way through.
Yeah.
Of course, it was papered on the inside, and that much wood wouldn't stop a two-by-four very well. The one that hit over the front door, it came in far enough. The door was framed up on this 1x12 so that it was thicker here for the door frame. But anyway, Dad kept the double-barrel shotgun laying up on that door frame over the door inside the house. And when that 2x4 came through, it hit the gun, broke the stock off of the shotgun, and something or other came in and hit that Aladdin lamp there and broke the chimney off of it. So I had to buy a new chimney to put on it. And Dad got a piece of walnut somewhere or other and made a new stock, butt stock to go on that double-barrel shotgun, which wasn't a professional job, and if you remember, it didn't fit real well. But they told me the next morning, you know, that we had a storm, and they looked and saw that it had almost come through right over my head where I was sleeping. I didn't wake up. But the tin that came off of the roof of the chicken house, it was good corrugated iron, you know, sheet iron roof. It was scattered over the pasture for half a mile nearly. It was way down in the pasture.
Well, you finished up high school before the war started?
No. When the war started in Europe, we had a practice at high school that all the high school students met in the study hall first thing in the morning. And Maurice Ferris was the superintendent. They had a superintendent just for that one school. And I think they may have had a principal for the grade school. But anyway, he would give us a little lecture on the current events. And he told us about the war going on in Europe and how it was going and who was fighting, how serious it was. He'd give us a 5-minute rundown, you know, and we'd have the Pledge of Allegiance and announcements. And it didn't last over 5-8 minutes maybe every morning. But
so this probably be the fall of 39?
Maybe so, maybe so. But that was the practice anyway. And
plan.
When Pearl Harbor was bombed, see, that was the fall of 41, December the 7th. In 41, I would have been a junior. I was in my junior year of high school, and I guess when I got to be 18, I had to register for the draft. And because I was working on the farm, Dad applied for deferment for my farming need, helping him. He had not only, he had rented another farm which didn't have much farming land, mostly grazing. And in 43, I guess it was, maybe early 43. No, it wasn't then. It was way back before that. Anyway, he had bought 160 acres that joined the one that we were on. We called it the Burkhalter place. It was up on the hill. He bought that with a government loan.
Yeah.
Only paid 4% interest on that, and he was scared to death he's going to lose everything because you know, you got to make those regular payments to the government every year. Well,
well, you started telling me something, and I interrupted you about your teacher telling you about the war and.
well, he kept us up to date,
Yeah.
and there were 2 or 3 of the boys in my class that volunteered to go into the service so that they could get into the area they wanted, you know, and maybe get in the Navy or in the Air Force, whatever they wanted. Some weren't very interested in school in the first place, anything to get away from home.
Yeah.
And we had 16 in the junior class, 10 of us graduated. But I got a deferment because we had 480 acres that we were taking care of, and in 41, I guess it was, along about that time, Dad bought a second tractor. We had already put power lift on the little F-12, but then he bought a Farmall H, which was a 20 horsepower, and we started doing a lot of work, custom work for the neighbors. And sometimes
Building terraces.
yeah, we got into building terraces, and of course after I graduated in 43, we were running the H Farmall night and day. Dad would drive at night and I'd drive during the day, or sometimes vice versa.
Yeah.
But we were doing a lot of work and building terraces, and we were getting enough money to pay off the tractor and pay off the farm that we had. And so they needed farmers to supply food for the troops.
Right.
Because so many farmers had gone into service, and farms were short-handed, and factories were short-handed, and women were going to work in the factories. And, anyway, I was classified, I guess it was 2D or something like that, as a farm exemption. And early 45, I started preaching. And Dad and I went to the board, forgotten now what to call it, the draft board in Sayre. Each county had a draft board, I think. And I presented a letter from the elders of the church that I was recognized as a preacher of the gospel, and that I planned to train to be a preacher. And so they classified me then as 4F, which was a classification of those that couldn't pass the physical.
Yeah.
I had already been to Oklahoma City for my physical and passed it all right. And Dad was afraid I would be drafted, and I didn't want to bear arms.
Yeah.
I didn't want to list as a conscientious objector, but they gave me an exemption, and that was in spring of 45.
Yeah.
And just a couple of months after that, victory was declared in Europe, August 8th, 9th victory in Japan, when Japan surrendered after a couple of atomic bombs dropped on them.
VE Day and VJ Day.
Right.
Well, there was one more story about Clayton and you and Westall that we had talked about when you were going off to school after the war ended all of a sudden.
Well, Westall had been down to Abilene. They were having some difficulties with him and the guys he was running with, and so they sent him down there to keep him out of trouble, I think.
He was going to the academy.
Some said to reform him.
Yeah.
So he went to Abilene to finish school, his junior and senior year, I think.
But that was the Christian Academy there in Abilene.
I had been out of college, out of school 1 year, no, 2 years. I had been out of high school 2 years. Clayton had been out 1 year. Westall still had a year to go.
Okay.
And so Artie and Evan decided that they wanted Clayton to go to school at Abilene and Westall to go back and finish high school at Abilene. They were both on the same campus, so
yeah.
The high school academy there was 50 yards from the administration building for the college.
Yeah.
So they called me up and said, we're going to Abilene and I'd like for you to go with us. So would you like to go down to Abilene? Well, I had thought that I would probably go to Pepperdine because Claude had gone to school at Pepperdine, and
Clem was going to go out there.
Chris had been out to Pepperdine. He played basketball for the Pepperdine team.
Okay.
But then he went into the Air Force and trained as a pilot, and they made him an instructor. But Clem...
So that kind of explains your interest in flying out there at that little field there by the home place in Sayre.
Clem decided that he should go to Pepperdine as well, since Chris was in school out there about that time, and Claude and Francis were living just off the campus there. So he went out there to live with them for a while, and that was the fall of '43. Well, he hadn't much more than enrolled in school than he decided that he was going to be drafted, and the thing to do was to enlist, volunteer for the Air Force,
right,
and follow in the footsteps of Chris.
So Chris had volunteered too.
I don't know if he volunteered or whether, I don't know how he got into the Air Force. Maybe he did. They might have given him a choice.
Well, now Ruth is how much younger than Chris? So she was out there too, right? She in the Air Force.
She wasn't out in California.
Oh, well, where did she get in?
I don't think she was in the Air Force.
Oh.
She was in the military.
Yeah.
But she was living in Fort Worth,
okay.
I think, working before she went in.
But so Clem enlisted.
Clem enlisted so he wouldn't be drafted.
Okay.
And they had quarters instead of semesters.
Yeah.
And he just went 1 quarter. And he got out in the middle of November, I guess it was, of the first quarter.
Yeah.
He had already enlisted, and he was getting ready to come home. Faye and Marvin were moving to California because Marvin had learned that he could get a job working in the oil field. and you make pretty good money out there being a pumper, I think, in an oil field at Taft, California. Well, they had 4 kids and two-door Plymouth, I think it was. It was a little old Plymouth, about a 37 or 8 Plymouth, maybe, and a 2-wheel trailer, and they loaded up all their belongings on this 2-wheel trailer and asked me if I would go with them and help drive, and I could come back with Clem.
Yeah.
And so I agreed to go. And we went out there with just the 7 of us in this little
7 people.
4 kids,
You're
3
packed in
adults
there,
counting
aren't
me,
you?
and part of the time I got to ride in the front seat. Most of the time,
5 of you in the back seat.
Most of the time, Faye was in the back seat with 3 younger kids, and 1 between me and Marvin. Part of the time I drove, but I rode with them out to Taft, California, and then I was there 2 or 3 days. Wasn't very long. They took me down. I guess it was on Saturday. They took me down to Los Angeles to Claude and Francis' place, and Clem was living with them, and they. I think Francis was still in school. Claude was teaching. I remember we went to church there. At that time, the campus of Pepperdine was in the Watts area. Most beautiful area you ever saw. All the streets were lined with identical palm trees.
Yeah.
All these beautiful I'd never seen palm trees. Both sides of the street had these palm trees, every one of them the same size. Looked like they planted them all at the same time.
Were those date palms or just decorative?
I don't know what they were. But anyway, Clem finished up his final exams, and we were going to hitchhike back to Fort Worth and see Lydia and Judd and Ruth.
Got to make a round trip out of it.
Who was there, and from there up to Sayre and tell his folks goodbye.
Kind of adventure.
Well, he had taken me over to Hollywood one day on a streetcar.
Yeah.
Might have been a bus, I'm not sure, but anyway, he could ride for about a nickel or dime, and we went over there and went to Grauman's Chinese Theater, where you see all these footprints of famous actors and actresses. And then we went to the stadium there where they have the
Rose Bowl.
Saw that. We rode around quite a lot on bicycles.
Was he living in the dorm at Pepperdine?
No, he was living with Claude and Francis.
Okay, so you all
and they had bicycles which we borrowed and rode around. And we rode out to the ocean one time. I'd never seen the ocean. Had to ride down there and see all that sand.
Yeah.
But
what was Claude teaching?
I'm not sure. Maybe Bible. But he finished up his exam, and he was all packed and ready, and we caught a city bus out as far as they went to the edge of town, heading east on the highway. I don't know if that was Highway 66 or what it was, but it was nearest thing to an interstate, 2-lane highway. But
but it was the
We rode out to the,
paved.
as far as we could, and got off and started hitchhiking. Well, it was about 3 o'clock when we started. By then it was all around 4:30 seems like, and we couldn't get a ride, you know. Two guys
Yeah.
together. We had a bag apiece, you know.
Yeah.
We were trying to hitchhike, and no one seemed to want to pick us up. But we finally got someone to take us out, maybe 10 miles. From there, somebody picked us up and took us over into the desert.
Mm.
And we finally ended up in the dark in a little town out in the desert. And Clem said, let's go to the railroad depot and see if we can't hitch a ride on a freight train.
Yeah.
So we got directions from somebody, and it must have been 10 or 11 o'clock, and we got over to the station, which is about the size of a bathroom.
Yeah.
And there was a little bench big enough for 2 people to sit on, and a window where the guy was that sold tickets.
Yeah.
And we asked him when the next train would come through. I think he said it'd be a couple of hours. And so he said it's all right for us to wait. So we waited there. It was warm and it was getting cold outside in the desert.
Yeah.
This was along after the 15th of November, I think, somewhere around middle of November, getting on toward Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So we sat there miserable, sleepy. We couldn't keep our eyes open and couldn't get comfortable. I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when the train came in. And we assumed that it was a freight train. We went out and asked the brakeman if we could ride. And he said, ask the, what is the guy, the conductor, ask the conductor. And so we started looking for the conductor. And we finally asked the engineer up there, said, can we ride this train? And he said, well, you need to ask the conductor about that. And along about that time, the brakeman came back and he said, you boys better get inside if you're going to ride this train. So we ran around on the other side and climbed in an open car. Yeah. Had the open door on it, you know.
Right.
Well, it turned out it was a baggage car, but it was an empty baggage car. And we got out about a mile out of town and made a big curve. We looked out the door and it was a passenger train. Yeah. And we were afraid we'd be thrown off somewhere out in nowhere. Yeah. In the desert. And we huddled up in the corner and
trying to keep warm.
It was cold, trying to keep warm. Next thing I knew, somebody was shining a flashlight in my eyes. I'd heard about the railroad bulls, you know, that they throw people off the train to try to ride free. Yeah. And he had a gruff voice, and I thought, boy, this is it.
End of the road.
He said, why don't you boys come up in this other car? Said, it's heated. So he took us into another car, and I don't know if it had any baggage in it or not, maybe a few, but
the door
was closed, and we were warm enough, and we rode the train into Phoenix, Arizona. Got in there about 8 o'clock the next morning, and we thought, well, we've been lucky, we better jump off before anybody sees us. And before it quit rolling, we got off the train. When we jumped off, you know, I guess we opened the door enough to jump off. There was a guy standing there waiting to get the luggage.
Yeah.
He was going to get ours. We said, this is our luggage, and we jumped off and left. And we were glad to get away.
Yeah.
So we walked from the middle of Phoenix, we walked out to the edge of town and hitchhiked all day. Made about 300 miles, I think, to Flagstaff.
Yeah.
And we were worn out because we hadn't slept. And it had been a real rough day. We hadn't done very well. Night was coming on. We had a little money, so we said, let's catch the bus. So we took the bus into Fort Worth, rode all night, and got in there the next day.
Well, you were telling about while you were at Claude and Francis, you went to get some bread, and it was raisin bread. You never had eaten anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. It was a 1 pound loaf, I guess. I'd never heard of raisin bread, but she gave me some money and sent me to the store to get a loaf of bread. I don't know if she said get raisin bread or not, but anyway, I brought home that raisin bread, and I was kind of hungry, and I ate a piece. It was so good, I ate about 5 or 6 pieces. I went back to the store to get another loaf of bread. That was something I'd never had, raisin bread. That was
pretty good stuff.
That was like eating cake.
Well, was that the first time you had been introduced to dates? I know you always liked dates.
I don't remember.
I know they grow them out there on those date palms.
I can't recall. I wasn't there very long.
Yeah.
I guess it was only
A weekend or so.
2 or 3 nights at Claude's house.
So you got back then to Sayre and Westall, and then we're all going to Abilene, so you decided to
I
just
got
go
back to Sayre around Thanksgiving, 1943. And I worked about 2 years on the farm. And after the war ended, then I told Clayton and Westall that I'd come on down, but I wasn't ready to go yet. Mother had told me that she would make me a birthday cake, and I could have some of my friends for Sunday dinner. And I think, I'm not sure if it was September the 10th or maybe it was on my birthday, but anyway, I stayed for a birthday dinner on Sunday. They went on down there on Saturday. They took a big suitcase, my stuff, left me with a small bag I could take with me. And so I hitchhiked. I may have ridden the bus part of the way, but anyway, I didn't have to be in a big hurry. Getting down there, they wanted to find a place for the boys to live. So they went on down Saturday, and maybe they phoned and told us where to go, told me where they would be. Anyway, I had this birthday party. I'd never had a birthday party before. And Lloyd and his girlfriend and me and another girl ate dinner. There were 6 of us for my birthday dinner. And so I left home the next day to go to Abilene. They had rented a little apartment that they found. It was mile and a half or 2 miles from the campus.
Yeah.
And you could walk a little ways and catch a city bus and ride it for a nickel. But I couldn't see riding out there back every day. And the classes, you know, are broken up. You know, maybe 2 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. And so I said, I don't think this is going to work very well. I guess they'd already paid a month's rent. But anyway, I went out and got registered and everything, and asked around, and I found a garage apartment that we could rent. It was a big room with a tiny little kitchenette.
Yeah.
Had 2 double beds, so they would rent it to 4 boys. And you've heard of James Walter Nichols? He was living with his grandmother, Sister Williamson.
Okay.
And she put him in charge of collecting the rent. He was still a student at the time.
Yeah.
He really was the first preacher on the Herald of Truth program. And he was talented and smart. And, anyway, his relatives helped him out, I guess.
Yeah.
But I made a down payment on
The rent.
the rent. I think they charged us $40 a month. And so that made $10 for each one of us. And I was responsible for collecting from the other 3.
Yeah.
And when the first day of the month rolled around, James Walter was knocking on the door and waking us up at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
It's too late for you boys to be sleeping. Where's the rent? And she was afraid that we weren't going to pay our rent.
Yeah.
Anyway, I paid the rent and then collected from my roommates.
Yeah.
I slept with Clayton, and Hartzell Johnson slept with Foy Kirkpatrick.
So you all had 2 double beds.
We had 2 double beds. Those 2 were preachers. And of course, Clayton had a record player, and he played records all the time. I couldn't study at night because of all the laughter and talk and record playing. And I'd get up early in the morning and study.
Yeah.
And they were unhappy because I got up early and woke them up. And I was as quiet as I could be, but they didn't want the light on or anything. That lasted 1 year. Foy graduated. Clayton dropped out after the first year and married Linda Lee Watts.
And you had introduced him to Linda Lee.
Yeah.
Back when they were in high school.
Well, it was shortly before we went off to college. Spring of '45, summer of '45, I guess, maybe. It was shortly before he left to go to school.
So he had her pulling him back home.
Well, I guess they were interested in each other. I don't know.
But she's somebody you had met in Sayre, or was she going?
She grew up there. She attended services. Her grandmother was Sister Watts. She was a fine lady in the congregation, older woman.
They lived in Berlin?
No, they just lived a block west of the church house.
Okay, so she lived in town.
In town. Linda Lee was a real blonde-headed, thin girl, a couple of years younger than we were.
But Clayton was going out to Bulow Church.
Yeah. And anyway, I found another roommate in a different place to live the second year. Third and fourth years, rented a place in the Jennings house,
Okay.
which is right on the corner across from the college church building, which wasn't there at the time.
Yeah.
Church met in the Sewell Auditorium.
And I guess it's not there anymore.
And I was just across the street from the auditorium.
Yeah.
You know, it was the first house
Yeah.
from Sewell Auditorium, and it was less than a block from the administration building, and about a 3-minute walk to the cafeteria and library and everything else.
Yeah.
It was most convenient. We got, they had a spare room, large room, that she wanted to rent. Her daughter and son-in-law lived in another room. And so I had 2 roommates. They had a double bed and I had a single bed. There was only one bathroom for 6 of us.
Yeah. Close quarters.
So we had to knock before we went in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Take turns. But the ones that lived in the house, the owners, the woman that owned it, Sister Jennings, her daughter and son-in-law, they were very accommodating to give us access when we needed it, so we could
Right.
get to class, get to breakfast and whatever.
Well, tell me a little bit about you and Mom dating, Betty Jane Rucker.
Well, she went to Freed-Hardeman for 2 years, taught school for a year, and came to Abilene to finish up because they only had 2-year college at Freed-Hardeman. And so she came out for the fall term of 47. And in the spring of 48, I had seen her around, but we hadn't dated. And my roommate had a couple of dates with her, but I didn't think anything about it, I guess. And when the fall of 48 rolled around, see, I went to summer school in 48.
Okay.
I had, I think, 3 preaching appointments I didn't want to lose.
Yeah.
And with my work on campus and my preaching appointments, I was making enough money that I wasn't going into debt. I was paying as you go.
Ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I finally graduated and paid all my debts and had $100 left.
Wow.
I had saved up $600 working on the farm before I went down there. So that helped. Yeah. Anyway, the fall of 48, I thought, well, I just got 1 semester left. It's time to find a wife. And I decided the ones I knew weren't very good prospects. I mean, the ones I had dated, either they weren't interested in me or I didn't have much interest in them. Yeah. I didn't see any permanent liaison there. But there were 2 or 3 things that the preacher boys attended. One was evangelistic forum for preachers. There was Tuesday night devotional to all those who felt inclined to worship a little more. And then there was, well, let's see, there was young people's meeting. But they had devotional and administration steps every Tuesday night. But they had mission study on Wednesday night early, before services, early on Wednesday. All who are interested in missions in the least way or want to get interested in missionary work would come and listen to a missionary from all over the world. They had different ones that come. And I'd see this red-headed woman there.
She was
So
in
she went
position.
to ladies' meetings, she went to young people's
It was
meetings,
neat.
she went to Tuesday night devotional, she went to the mission study class. Now, people went to mission study, you better believe that they were good Christians. Anyway, I had seen her and I was attracted, and so I asked her for a date to the football game. And I didn't have much money, and so this was a football game. I think it was against McMurray, and we could get in free being students, and it cost us a nickel apiece to ride the bus over there. Anyhow,
Cheap date.
we had lots of cheap dates. I mean, I did.
Yeah.
I don't know about Betty. I guess I never did go with anyone after that, and don't think she did.
Yeah.
But my roommate found out that I was going with her. He said, "You ought to marry her." Said, "She's a good Christian girl." And by then he had gotten tangled up with a girl that wasn't so Christian. And they married and divorced. And,
Oh boy.
anyway, I didn't know it at the time, but Betty had dated a while Leon Sharp, who was a gospel preacher.
Okay. And wound up preaching there at
I followed him at Canton,
Canton, yeah.
Texas,
Yeah.
and his son became the preacher for the college church for several years at Abilene.
Wow.
He was a good preacher. Anyway, when Leon found out that Betty was dating me, he didn't ask her out anymore. We dated until I finished up in January,
Yeah.
and I got a job preaching in Hammond. And I wrote to her every day, and she wrote to me every day. I went back for lectureship in February, and then I went back for spring break in March. She didn't have enough money to go home, so she was there for the spring break a week. And I borrowed Dad's car and went down there and asked her to marry me.
There you go. Well, tell the little story about pointing your finger at her and saying blush. Is that your roommates?
My two roommates, they just tickled to death to make her blush.
Yeah.
So we'd go to the cafeteria. They called it the Beanery. You paid for your meals a semester at a time. And they'd catch her in the cafeteria, which was a basement under the library.
Yeah.
And they'd come sauntering up where she was sitting at the table and get her attention and say, "Blush!" And she'd turn red, and it just tickled her to death. But after she started going to me, she never did blush anymore.
Well, that's a good story.
You have time for me to tell you how we set up housekeeping?
Yeah. If you can do it in 2 minutes.
I didn't have much money saved.
Uh,
I made a deal with Dad to buy the car for $600.
Yeah.
He had paid $900 for it new. Let's see, that was about 6 years before. Anyway, he said he'd sell it to me for that, and I could pay it out. Well, I bought a table and 4 chairs, just a wooden table. I think they cost me $12.50, $12.50.
Yeah.
I bought a dresser for $10 and a mirror to hang over it, and that was about $10, $15.
That was right there in Hammond?
Somewhere around there, maybe Elk City. I think most of them Elk City. Mother and Dad gave us a bedstead and springs and a cotton mattress. And I had it worked over in Elk City, and they made an inner-spring mattress out of it, so I had a new mattress bed. So that was a good bed. I ordered a set of dishes and a set of flatware from Montgomery Ward. They shipped it to us.
So you had it ready to go after you had the wedding?
Oh yeah, I got a dust mop and a broom. The church furnished the house, but there was nothing in it.
Yeah.
Not even a cook stove. I persuaded them to buy the cook stove, and I bought the refrigerator and moved it with me when we left.
Yeah.
First thing that happened, they said we're having our summer gospel meeting. Preacher always keeps the visiting preacher, so we expect you to keep the preacher the week he's here.
Yeah.
I said, we only have one bed. One of the men said, we'll lend you our bedroom suit. It's loaned out already. I want you to go pick it up. I'm tired of them using it. Before we got it home, the vanity mirror broke off and broke the plate glass mirror.
Oh boy.
And so
7 years bad luck.
we ended up having to pay for the bedroom suit.
That he had loaned out.
Yeah.
So you had it lined up, and you went out and got married in Tennessee, and
Yep.
Came back and you had.
I went down and graduated at Abilene, and she went with me, and we stopped to see my relatives over in East Texas, then up to northern Arkansas to see 3 of her aunts and uncles, families, and from there over to Henderson. We got married.